Hi there, Ed Merrison from Vininspo here. It's early-ish autumn, harvest time here on the Mornington Peninsula. I'm in Merrick's North at the top of a lovely sloping block of Pinot Gris. Down there in the background you've got Western Port. I thought after a tricky spring here that turned into a really nice summer for ripening grapes, it's quite nice to have a look at what happens next in turning these bunches of ripe Pinot Gris into a very fine example of cool climate Pinot Gris.
So this is Pinot Gris. Surprised by the colour? They call it a white grape, but it's not white. It's not even green, nor indeed grey, the English equivalent of the French gris or Italian grigio. It's pinky purple, and that hue can vary quite a bit. That colour might come as a particular surprise, as so much of this grape's output is a pale-coloured, inexpensive and fairly neutral white wine produced by the ocean known as Pinot Grigio from northeast Italy. Here we're talking about a different beast, embracing more of the pinosity of the variety. It is, after all, a mere colour mutation of the planet's most romanticised red wine grape, Pinot Noir. That varietal character comes from picking it later when more aroma and sugar have accumulated in the grapes. That in turn will give more body and texture to the wines. Pinot Gris is often referred to as a semi-aromatic variety. Its aromas don't tend to be pronounced like the perfume of Riesling, Sauvignon Blanc or Gewürztraminer, but it can be more expressive in its fragrance than, say, Chardonnay. It buds early, which means the new season's growth develops in that early part of spring where weather patterns can be erratic. Harsh conditions can harm it at this fragile stage, potentially setting growers up for smaller crops later in the season. It is also an early ripening grape. That's why you'll generally find it in cooler climates. Otherwise it would ripen too fast, accumulating high sugars and eventually high alcohols without developing appealing flavours. And unlike grapes like Riesling and Chenin Blanc, Pinot Gris is not inherently high in acidity, which drops to potentially low levels in riper grapes. This can lead to a lack of freshness and perhaps a dull, flabby profile to the wine. So this is a good spot for it. It's the Scorpo vineyard in Merrick's North on the Mornington Peninsula. The cool maritime climate here leads to a relatively lengthy growing season, so these grapes are coming off the vine nice and ripe. The site faces southwest. That's a cool aspect here in the southern hemisphere. It would be possible to harvest with a machine, but that's more conducive to a larger, flatter site. It would also shake the berries off their bunches, making it impossible to press the grapes as whole clusters. The other advantage of hand harvesting is that selection of ripe, healthy grapes is taking place right here in the vineyard. There are plenty of second crop bunches or secondaries hanging around here. These are common with Pinot. It's where bunches grow on lateral shoots. They might run 6 to 8 weeks after the main bunch, which means they're underripe and would upset the flavour profile and acid balance of the final wine. Those benefits of hand harvesting of course come with a cost. This team spent around 11 hours here, kicking off at 7 AM, harvesting this slope and a couple of smaller blocks over the ridge. But this is what you get. Nice bunches arriving back at the winery. At this stage they're sweet, way sweeter than table grapes, with some pink berry and musk flavours and an appealing gingery zing. They might be processed immediately or, depending on the workflow at this end, put in a cool room where low temperatures prevent the onset of fermentation. When ready, the press gets loaded. This is an airbag or pneumatic press. It's an expensive, high-precision piece of kit, but pressing is a delicate part of the process. The cycle is set to the desired speed and pressure so that the grapes are gradually, gently pressed, so the skins burst and the juice is slowly released. It's important not to squeeze so hard that you risk crushing stalks and pips that would add bitter flavours and astringent tannins to the wine. The stalks of these whole bunches play an important role in aiding the draining of the juice. They kind of act like channels. Again, what we're trying to do is extract pure, beautiful juice of those bunches the pickers painstakingly harvested. What's left behind, the skins, stalks and all, is called the pomace or marc. Another choice is if and when to make press cuts, that is, whether to separate pressings according to the stage at which the juice is extracted. Hard pressings, the juice extracted later, are lower in acidity and higher in phenolic compounds, including those that make the wine feel harder and taste more bitter. You might isolate them and use them sparingly as a blending component in the same wine. You could set them aside to make a cheaper wine, or you can discard them entirely. The lighter cycle favoured for this particular wine means those harder pressings don't enter the equation. What comes out at first is a fairly murky juice, beyond cloudy. Cell membranes of pulp and fragments of skin and stem are suspended within, as well as other residue. Over time, these will settle to the bottom of the tank or barrel and get left behind as the wine is moved to another vessel in a process called racking. The grapey stuff, as opposed to the murk and sludge that settles fastest and therefore sits lowest, is often referred to as solids. Some winemakers like to retain it as it can impart character and savoury elements to the wine. From the press, the juice is run to a fermentation vessel, maybe a stainless steel tank or a barrel. The former is favoured for freshness and aroma as it protects the wine from oxygen. Oak, meanwhile, will allow a little oxygen to enter, allowing the wine to breathe. This might tone down aromas a touch, but tends to lend the wine more weight and texture. This juice will spend a bit of time in a chill tank to commingle and settle before being run to barrels for fermentation. The juice is cloudy but a far more enticing colour. barrels are made of oak that will have been used before for another wine. The idea is not to add oaky flavours, but to let that gentle breathing process take place. The winemaker might add cultured yeast, or as is the case here, allow fermentation to start naturally with the yeast present in the vineyard and winery. This is often referred to as natural, wild, spontaneous, or indigenous fermentation. Cultured yeast offer reassurance of a smooth fermentation and prescribed outcomes, say for example if a purer aromatic profile is desired. Indigenous yeast leave a little more space for the unexpected, effectively a wilder ride through fermentation, where more singular aroma and flavour compounds might emerge. Some say indigenous yeast give a result that is truer to the vineyard since, at least before a ubiquitous dominant yeast strain takes over, the combination of yeast that begin the ferment are a localised mix. The yeast convert the sugars in the grapes to alcohol and the juice becomes wine. This batch will take about a week or so until all those sugars are consumed and the wine is dry. The spent yeast cells remain suspended in the wine along with those solids we spoke about. Again, the wine can be racked off, but as with this one, it can be left on fine lees, as they say, with those lees adding creamy or nutty notes as well as texture. Perhaps surprisingly too, they keep it fresh as they act as an antioxidant. Think about how fresh champagne tastes. That's aged on the lees in bottle, of course. Eventually, this wine will be lightly filtered to remove any other residue before going into the bottle in about 10 months' time. We'll end up about 13% alcohol, medium to full-bodied, with soft but animating acidity, likely showing flavours of nashy pear, rock melon, cashew, gingery spice, and other stuff. And that is how those pinky purple grapes we saw at the beginning turn into something a little bit like this.